Gentlemen, let's start with the male and indeed the golf story that's stunned the sporting world. Saudis buy golf is the headline. Stunning deals as Rivals Tour join forces and LIV pumps in £1 billion. A story by Riyadh Al Samurai and Matt Hughes here, but every paper has it. Andy, Saudi buys golf. Is that pretty much the summarising line?
Teddy, the three ways that sum it up perfectly. You know, I noticed the eye there saying golf surrenders to LIV, and then the Guardian saying 3 tours merge. Well, I don't think anyone's quite seeing it like that. They're seeing it as the Saudis buy golf, men's golf, by the way. So, and we'll see what's to come in the women's game. But yes, that's what it feels like. You know, we are used to over the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years of the Saudis. They bought a football club. They buy players to play in the Saudi Pro League. They're involved in a couple of Formula One teams. They're involved in MotoGP. So they're assembling this portfolio of interest in sport. But this feels different because, as that Daily Mail says, that Daily Mail headline says, it feels like they've bought an entire sport. Now, the DP World Tour and the PGA Tour will argue otherwise, of course. They will argue that it's almost a natural progression, that, you know, it's convenient for all parties. Saudis want the credibility that the PGA Tour and DP World Tour bring. And those tours simply can't ignore the sort of money that the Saudis have to offer. You know, the Public Investment Fund, there's one of the newspapers is suggesting that they're going to put in £1 billion into this project. Well, that really is, you know, small change. It's loose change. At the last count, the Public Investment Fund for Saudi Arabia was worth way in excess of £600 billion. So that is, you know, that's the context that it has to be put in. And the ramifications are myriad, let's face it. You know, I'm sure we'll go into some of those on how the players who stayed loyal to the PGA Tour and DP World Tour are going to feel about this compromise. How Jay Monahan, the PGA Tour commissioner, is going to explain to his players, which I think he's probably trying to do right at this minute, that he didn't tell them, didn't consult them before agreeing this deal with PIF. How the European Tour can now reconcile itself, you know, having suspended those members who went to LIV Golf. All these things, you know, there are so many ramifications from, let's face it, a story that was absolutely jaw-dropping when it broke today. So many ramifications, but the overarching one is the one you see there, which is Saudis buy golf. And I think that headline just about sums up an incredibly complex issue in 3 words.
Absolutely. All the papers having a crack at it. Mark, let's get to the Guardian. Their headline, Saudis take control, 3 golf tours merge in shock end to the stalemate. Piece by Ewan Murray. And within that, in the inside of the Guardian analysis, which is previewed here with the quote, it's the latest depressing illustration that bottomless pits of money can disrupt and distort everything in sport. Amnesty International statement says it's to distract attention for the country's atrocious human rights record, that being Saudi Arabia's human rights record. Is Ewan Murray right there? Is Amnesty International right there? Is it money trumping morality?
We could put it that way. I mean, look, the whole sports washing debate, the fact that Saudi Arabia are involved in golf and football and boxing, it actually brings more attention to Saudi Arabia, more negative attention. So the idea of sports washing, it's not washing it in a very kind of positive light. So I don't quite know yet what the sports washing element is. So let's be honest that this hasn't actually helped polish Saudi Arabia's image. So I think we need to part that to one side a little bit. And like Dunn said, this has got massive ramifications. And, you know, just because they've agreed to merge is the phrase, I guess, but like Dunn said, it is really a takeover. It cannot go back to normal tomorrow. There's so much acrimony from the last 18 months, 2 years in golf over what's happened here. Just little things like, you know, Henrik Stenson was the Ryder Cup captain this year, had to resign. That's gone. You've had Rory McIlroy has been very critical of the Saudi golf, the LIV Tour, but he will now have to accept that whatever he wins in this new kind of competition will be funded primarily by Saudi Arabia. So he's had issues there which he must address, and a lot of the players have been hostile to each other. So whatever the end game is for Saudi Arabia, it's not been a positive one in terms of the reputation or the reputation of golf. So the sports washing element, I'm not too sure about. I mean, look, we've had on the broader region, we've had Qatar have hosted a World Cup, Abu Dhabi or Man City who are about to win a treble. I think the world in general, sport in general, is going to have to get used to the reality that the money and the power right now is in the Middle East, and that is where money is. power is, and that's where the decisions are dictated to. And I think we have to accept that a lot of sports are now going to be attracted by the money in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, and it's going to be controlled by it as well. And we've only seen today that, Karim Benzema's completed his move to Al Ittihad. We've heard reports of other high-profile players, Wilfried Zaha, N'Golo Kante, I'm hearing Sergio Busquets, that are going to the Saudi Pro League. This is the reality now. And I think, it may end up with the World Cup, the Men's World Cup going there in 2030. So this isn't a story that's going to go away.
It's interesting what Mark's saying there, Andy, isn't it? What's your definition of sports washing? Actually, is this actually working to improve Saudi's image? Let's go to the Times. Saudi rebels buy into golf world order. LIV agrees shock merger with PGA Tour. And this point here, their second bullet point, legal fight ends, but players must pay fines. Is some sanction for the rebel LIV Tour players now imperative to just mend things? Because some players did take a principled stand and back the PGA Tour, didn't they? Notably, Rory McIlroy and Tiger Woods, who turned down between them billions of pounds.
Yeah. Listen, let's not kid ourselves about this. What's good for this and what's good for that. It's all about the money. It is all about the money. Follow the money and you'll end up in a place where everything is explained by that. Firstly, on the Rory McIlroy issue, I mean, he is almost a standalone issue in this, and obviously will be fascinating to hear what he has to say, because don't forget, Rory McIlroy became the poster boy for the PGA Tour. He became its spokesman. He was the most vehement critic of LIV Golf, and early on he suggested that he wouldn't take that Saudi money, of which he was offered vast amounts. Now he's going to be playing for Saudi money. So that is a really, really difficult situation that Jay Monahan is somehow going to have to explain to the guy, as I say, who is the absolute pin-up player of the PGA Tour. So let's see how he deals with that. But when it comes to the money and the legal rights, an ongoing legal battle could not be sustained by the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour. They don't have the funds. So what you've got actually is the Saudi model for LIV Golf, which was probably unsustainable. It wasn't a great model. It wasn't getting great publicity. It probably was not, even with their money, sustainable over a long period of time. They now get in with the DP World Tour and the PGA Tour. The PGA Tour and DP World Tour, in return, get vast amounts of money from the Public Investment Fund. And my guess, and it's an educated guess, is the way that Jay Monahan is now going to try and sell this to the players, now how he's going to try and calm them down, how he's going to try and placate them, it's simple. He's going to say, listen, guys, you're now going to earn a lot more money. You already earn unbelievable amounts. You're now going to earn double that, treble that. He can turn around and say, Mark just mentioned N'Golo Kante. They're talking about $100 million a year, for a player. And so the golf rulers can point and say, listen, this is the sort of money you're going to be getting, unimaginable money. These guys on LIV Golf, by the way, were playing for like $4 million, $4 million first prizes. Even the PGA Tour, even though they hiked up at their own cost, which they couldn't sustain, prize money up to get close to that, they couldn't get really close to it. But now, of course, they can, and that is the only way. The only way he can possibly be sold to the players who stayed loyal to the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour. The only way he can sell it to them is by saying you're going to earn a lot more dough.
Yeah, baffling numbers, Mark, especially in the context of a cost of living crisis, isn't it? I think even the PGA Tour numbers would befuddle some people at home who probably never even played golf or looked at a golf course or wouldn't recognise a golf player outside of Tiger Woods. But nonetheless, let's go to the Daily Telegraph and just segue into the wider context, which Andy alludes to there. This is from Tom Morgan, who says, what do the Saudis want? Everything. And he says the message in this article, the message to the rest of sport, however, was even more profound. For all the cries of sports washing and political dissent, this was another milestone to prove that Saudi has the sporting world at its feet. Do you feel it? Most sports leagues are going to end up Saudi owned or Middle East owned, at least? You mentioned that before.
Yeah, I'm not sure about sports leagues, but I do think that, the football side of it all started back in December, didn't it, when they signed Cristiano Ronaldo for Man United, let him go. So he went to Al Nassr, and that was the start of big things. And I was told about a month ago that they have big plans, the Saudi Pro League at least, to sign up to 50 players this summer from Europe's big five leagues. 50 players that are out of contract or, looking for a move. Now, Benzema is out of contract. I think Kante is coming to the end of his contract maybe in 12 months' time or this summer. I'm not too sure there. I think Zaha is out of contract. So their idea is to almost like trawl around for the players that maybe towards, early 30s, end of their career that can add the profile and make it, they want to make it the go-to league outside of Europe's big five leagues. I don't think they can compete with La Liga, Premier League, the Bundesliga, Serie A in terms of profile, history, and the Champions League. That is what will keep the big players in Europe, the Champions League, while it remains. I mean, obviously, we've heard talks of potentially a Club World Cup. Will Saudi Arabia be involved in that? We know that they're very keen on hosting the actual international World Cup. So I do think that in the years to come, that the game is going to change. And I think a lot of the facts is we have to accept right now that for the last 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 years, the vast majority of Europe's football has been funded by the Middle East, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, not just with the teams that they own, but because of the sponsorship deals with Emirates Airlines, with Etihad, with Qatar. So if the money's coming from there, it has been coming from there for a long time, it's inevitable that it'll continue that way. And I think money is power, isn't it? And in the West right now, in Europe and in North America, we have this cost of living crisis, like you say. It's much harder for these clubs to sustain paying massive wages. Now they've got a country in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia that can do it. And I think it's going to be very hard for the big leagues and the big clubs to compete if at some point this league gets so, strong that it can attract players at the peak of their powers.
Yeah, Andy, I was going to ask you about the consequences for the Saudi Pro League possibly, but it's complicated as well, isn't it? Because of Saudi investment in the Premier League. I was going to say, will the Saudi League possibly look at exceeding the Premier League when you look at Messi, Ronaldo, and Mbappe maybe at some point? Benzema's going. But Yasser Al-Rumayyan is also the chairman of Newcastle United. So what's his ambition at the heart of this? How key a figure? I know you've been looking at him.
Yes, well, I mean, he must be one of the most powerful figures, certainly in sport and in business. Don't forget that he's also the chairman of Aramco, which is the world's most valuable company, the Saudi Arabian oil company, which of course again it sponsors Formula One. By the way, that's where I think they'll be heading next. The Saudis, they'll be back in. I mean, there was a suggestion they'd already offered a big price to Liberty Media for Formula One, and my guess is. I'm with Mark. I don't think they'll own football leagues apart from their own, obviously, but I think Formula One will be next. In terms of the Saudi Pro League, I mean, that will be a long process. You mentioned those players, and it will still be those players whose careers in the blue ribbon leagues in Europe and in the Champions League are maybe coming to an end. So that's a long process. More importantly, football, again, I mentioned Formula One. The other thing, clearly, that this sort of takeover they've done today is a signal for is that Saudi Arabia will almost certainly want to stage the Football World Cup. And that has got to be one of their end goals in terms of strengthening their own league and increasing their positions in football in Europe.